On January 22, 2006, a Hopkinton police sergeant named Michael Sutton walked into a house he had visited the night before. He had come to check on a young family, a British couple named Neil and Rachel Entwistle, their 9-month-old daughter Lillian. They hadn't been seen in 2 days. Their friends were worried. Their mother was frantic. The night before, Sutton had conducted a welfare check at this same house. He had walked through the rooms, shone his flashlight into corners, called out for anyone who might be inside. He had looked into the master bedroom, taken one step inside, seen an unmade bed with bedding piled high, and moved on. He had seen nothing unusual. Now, 24 hours later, he was back. And this time, something was different. I noticed a slight odor in the basement. When I got to the first floor, the odor was stronger. It was an odor that was not there the night before. He followed the smell, up the stairs, down the hallway, to the master bedroom. I lifted the corner of the blanket that was closest to me. I observed what appeared to be an adult's foot. I first observed a small baby's face. I was looking down at the top of the head, the forehead, eyes, nose. I looked to the right of the baby's face and saw a woman's face. Rachel Entwistle, 27 years old, lay on her side, her arm draped over her daughter. Lillian Rose, 9 months old, lay beside her mother, partially covered by a pillow. Both were dressed in pajamas. Both had been shot, and they had been lying there, beneath that quilt, for 48 hours while the world searched for them. The discovery of Rachel and Lillian Entwistle's bodies on that cold January evening would trigger one of the most transatlantic manhunts in recent memory. It would expose a double life of debt, deception, and sexual obsession. It would reveal that the quiet, polite Englishman who had married into a loving American family was not who he appeared to be. But before the manhunt, before the arrest, before the trial and the conviction and the life sentence, there was something else. There was a house on a quiet street, a family waiting for answers, and a question that no one could answer. Where was the husband? January 19th, 2006. A Thursday evening. Priscilla Matarazzo stood in her kitchen in Carver, Massachusetts, speaking with her daughter Rachel on the phone. It was an ordinary call, the kind families make a dozen times a week without thinking. They talked about Rachel's new house, the rented townhouse at 6 Cubs Path in Hopkinton, where Rachel, Neil, and baby Lillian had been living for just over a week. They made plans for lunch that Saturday. Rachel would show her mother around. They'd order takeout, maybe Chinese, Rachel's favorite. It would be simple, it would be normal. It would never happen. Rachel sounded fine. That's what every family member says in retrospect, isn't it? She sounded fine. Tired from unpacking, yes. Busy with the baby, always. But fine. Nothing amiss. Nothing that would cause anyone to worry. She was looking forward to the weekend, to showing off her new home, to introducing her mother to the life she was building with her husband and daughter. It was the kind of conversation that leaves no impression because it's so utterly unremarkable. And that is exactly why Priscilla would replay it in her mind thousands of times in the years to come, searching for something she might have missed, some warning she should have heard. At 6 Cubs Path that evening, the lights were on. Smoke rose from the chimney. The house looked lived in, loved, alive. Rachel was inside with Lillian. Neil was there too, the husband, the father, the man who would, within 24 hours, become something else entirely. They were a family in their new home, doing what families do on a Thursday night. Rachel may have bathed Lillian. The bathroom would later be found with water still in the tub, as if she had been interrupted. She may have fed her, played with her, put her to sleep with classical music playing softly in her room. Normal things, ordinary things, the last normal ordinary things Rachel Entwistle would ever do. Rachel had no way of knowing that this would be the last conversation she would ever have with her mother. That within 24 hours, she and Lillian would be dead. That the man sleeping beside her that night, the man she had married, the man she had followed across an ocean, the father of her child, would be the one to kill them. No one knows the day of their own death. That is both a mercy and a cruelty. Rachel went to sleep on January 19th, believing she had a future. She had plans, she had dreams, she had a daughter who would take her first steps, speak her first words, grow into a woman. None of that would happen. And the man who would take it all was lying beside her, already planning. January 20th, 2006, a Friday. The day that would end with 2 people dead and 1 man on the run. Sometime that morning, the exact time would never be determined, because Neil Entwistle's story would shift and change. He left the house. He would later claim he went to run errands. He would later claim he returned to find them dead. But the truth, as investigators would eventually piece together, was far darker. Neil drove 50 miles to the home of his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo. Joe was at work. The house was empty. Neil had keys to the Matarazzo home, keys that would later be found in his car at Logan Airport, keys that contradicted his story about being unable to access the house when he needed it most. Joe Matarazzo was a member of the Old Colony Sportsman's Club. He owned several firearms, including a .22 caliber Colt revolver that he kept at home for protection. The gun was secured with a trigger lock, as required by law. The keys to the trigger lock were kept on the kitchen counter. Spare keys were in the bedroom nightstand. Months earlier, Joe had taken Neil to the shooting range and taught him to use this very weapon. Neil had seemed interested, attentive, normal. Now, that lesson would prove fatal. Neil took the gun. He took the spare trigger lock keys. He placed them in his car and drove back to Hopkinton. He would later claim he went to the Matarazzo home seeking a gun to kill himself, after finding Rachel and Lillian dead. But the timeline contradicts this. He left Hopkinton in the morning. He returned to Hopkinton. The murders occurred sometime between his departure and his return, or perhaps during it. Only Neil knows, and Neil has never told. What happened next is known only to Neil Entwistle. Rachel was in the master bedroom. Perhaps she was still in bed, waking slowly, Lillian beside her or in her arms. Perhaps she heard Neil return and thought nothing of it. Perhaps she smiled at him, said good morning, asked how his errands went. Perhaps Lillian cooed or reached for her father. We will never know. The gun was raised, a .22 caliber revolver, small enough to fit in a pocket, quiet enough that neighbors would later report hearing nothing unusual. Rachel was shot once in the forehead, at close range. The bullet was so small, so precisely placed, that it would go undetected until autopsy. There was no struggle, no signs of forced entry, no indication that Rachel saw it coming. Lillian was shot in the abdomen. The bullet passed through her tiny body, 9 months old, barely 20 pounds, and lodged in her mother's left breast. This single piece of ballistics evidence told investigators everything they needed to know about the positioning of the bodies. Lillian was in Rachel's arms, or cradled against her chest, when the shot was fired. Mother and daughter died together, in the same instant, at the hands of the man who should have protected them. Then, something strange. Neil covered them. He pulled the bedding up over their bodies, a quilt, blankets, pillows, and arranged it so that from the doorway, from a casual glance, it would look like nothing more than an unmade bed. He did not flee immediately. He did not call for help. He did not cry out or collapse or do any of the things a man might do if he had just discovered his family murdered. Instead, he smoothed the quilt. He made sure they were hidden, and then he left. He drove back to Carver. He returned the revolver to the Matarazzo home, placing it back exactly where he found it, as if nothing had happened. The trigger lock was reapplied. The spare keys were returned to the nightstand. The gun was exactly as Joe Matarazzo had left it, except for the DNA. Neil's DNA on the handle, Rachel's DNA on the muzzle, evidence that would wait, patiently, to be discovered. From Carver, Neil drove to Logan International Airport in Boston. He arrived at approximately 8:14 p.m. He entered the parking garage, left, returned. He was preparing. He was thinking. He was not grieving. He withdrew $800 in 2 transactions from various cards. 3 more attempted withdrawals, totaling $420, were denied. His accounts already maxed out, his financial desperation following him even as he fled. The man who had just murdered his family was worried about cash flow. At approximately 5 a.m. on January 21st, Neil Entwistle purchased a one-way ticket to London on British Airways. Cost $787. He paid in cash. He had no luggage, not a single bag. No diaper bag for the daughter he claimed to love. No souvenirs for the parents he was supposedly desperate to see. No change of clothes. Nothing. Just himself, a one-way ticket, and the knowledge of what he had left behind. At 8:15 a.m., British Airways Flight 212 departed Logan International Airport, bound for London Heathrow. Neil Entwistle was on it. Behind him, in a rented townhouse in Hopkinton, his wife and daughter lay dead beneath a quilt. They had been there for approximately 24 hours. They would remain there for another 24, undiscovered, while the world began to wonder where they were. While Neil flew east across the Atlantic, back in Hopkinton, life continued. The mail accumulated, the dog barked, the neighbors went about their business, unaware that a young mother and her baby lay dead just yards away. And Rachel's mother, Priscilla, prepared for lunch on Saturday. The lunch Rachel had promised, the lunch that would never happen. Saturday arrived. Priscilla drove to Hopkinton for lunch. She had been looking forward to this, seeing the new house, spending time with her daughter and granddaughter, sharing a meal and conversation. It was the kind of ordinary maternal pleasure that fills a life. But when she reached 6 Cubs Path, no one answered. The house was quiet. The doors were locked. Rachel's car was in the driveway, a 2001 Toyota Camry, parked exactly where it should be, but there was no sign of the family. Priscilla knocked. She waited. She circled the house, peering through windows, calling out. Nothing. No response. No movement. Just silence. Priscilla waited. She called Rachel's cell phone. No answer. She called Neil's cell phone. No answer. She stood in the cold, staring at a house that should have been full of life, and felt the first stirrings of something she could not yet name. Concerned but not yet panicked, she returned home, planning to try again later. She told herself there must be an explanation. There was always an explanation. That evening, Rachel's friends Joanna Gately and her sister Maureen arrived for a planned dinner. Rachel had invited them, excited to show off her new home, eager to reconnect with friends. But when they arrived, they found the same scene Priscilla had found that morning. A locked house, lights on inside, no one answering. They knocked. They waited. They called. Nothing. Concern deepened into unease. They called Priscilla, who told them about her own failed visit that morning. Together, they made a decision that would prove crucial. At 8:25 p.m., Hopkinton police received a call reporting a missing family. A young couple, a baby. No one has seen them in 2 days. The house is locked, but the car is there. Something feels wrong. Officers were dispatched to 6 Cubs Path for a welfare check. Sergeant Michael Sutton and Officer Aaron O'Neill arrived at the scene. They circled the property, checking doors and windows, shining their flashlights into the darkness. Everything was locked. Everything was quiet. But there was a car in the driveway. Lights were on inside. Someone should have been home. With the help of a blockbuster video card, a detail so mundane it would become almost absurd in retrospect, Sergeant Sutton managed to slip the lock and enter through the garage. The door opened. The house was dark beyond. The officers conducted a cursory search. This is important to understand. They were conducting a welfare check, not a homicide investigation. There was no reason to suspect violence. They looked into rooms, called out, checked for any signs of distress. They saw nothing obviously wrong. No overturned furniture, no blood, no signs of struggle, no forced entry. Nothing that would indicate a crime had been committed. Sergeant Sutton looked into the master bedroom. Later, under cross-examination at trial, he would describe exactly what he saw and exactly what he did. It would become one of the most scrutinized moments in the entire investigation.
There was a large bed in the center of the room. It was unmade. It looked as if all the bedding, comforter, blankets had just been piled up in the center of the bed. It didn't appear anyone was in the room, I took one step inside, looked around, and left.
He took one step into the room. That was all. From the doorway with the bedding piled high, he could not see the bodies beneath. He saw nothing out of place except a messy bed. And messy beds are not crimes. The officers completed their search, found nothing amiss, and left. They reported no one home. The case was closed, for now. Rachel and Lillian remained beneath the quilt, undiscovered, while the officers drove away and the house fell silent once more. But Rachel's friends were not satisfied. Something felt wrong. Something would not let them leave. Joanna Gately and her sister spent that freezing January night in their car on the driveway, waiting, watching, hoping that the family would return. They took shifts sleeping. They ran the engine for heat. 3 times they drove to a gas station to use the toilet. 3 times they came back and waited. They could not explain why they stayed. They only knew they could not leave. The next morning, Sunday, the sisters obtained the garage door code from a neighbor and let themselves in again. They had no authority to do this. They were not police. They were just 2 women who loved Rachel and could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Inside, they found more signs that something was terribly wrong. Plates and food were left out in the kitchen, as if the family had just eaten a meal and never returned. The table was set. A half-empty glass sat on the counter. In the bathroom, the tub was filled with water, cold now, but filled, as though Rachel had bathed Lillian and never come back. In Lillian's room, classical music played softly, endlessly, a lullaby for a baby who would never wake. Frightened now, truly frightened, the sisters called Priscilla. She and Joe Matarazzo rushed to Hopkinton, their hearts pounding with a fear they dared not name. Together, the group made a decision. They would file an official missing persons report at the Hopkinton police station. Something was wrong. Something had to be done. Sergeant Sutton, now aware that the family had still not been located, that a full day had passed since his initial search, that friends and family were genuinely terrified, agreed to conduct a second search. This time, he would be more thorough. This time, he would not rely on a casual glance. This time, as Sutton entered the house through the basement, he noticed something he had missed the night before. A smell. Faint in the basement, barely noticeable. Stronger on the first floor, unmistakable now. And overwhelming as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. It was the smell of death. The smell of 2 bodies that had been lying for 48 hours in a warm house. He followed the odor, down the hall, past Lillian's room, where classical music still played, past the bathroom, where bath water sat cold, to the master bedroom. The door was open. The bed was still unmade. The bedding was still piled high. He lifted the corner of the quilt. Later at trial, he would describe what he saw with the careful precision of a man who has spent years trying not to see it.
I lifted the corner of the blanket that was closest to me. I observed what appeared to be an adult's foot. I lifted the blanket further and first observed a small baby's face. I was looking down at the top of the head, the forehead, eyes, nose. I looked to the right of the baby's face and saw a woman's face.
Rachel Entwistle, 27 years old, shot once in the forehead. Lillian Rose, 9 months old, shot once in the abdomen. They lay on their sides, facing each other, as if sleeping. Rachel's arm was draped over her daughter. A pillow partially covered Lillian's face. They had been there for 2 days, while the world searched for them, while friends kept vigil in the cold, while a police officer walked past them and saw nothing. The discovery of the bodies transformed everything. Within hours, 6 Cubs Path was swarming with investigators, forensic teams, detectives from the state police. The house became a crime scene. The case became a double murder investigation. And one question dominated all others, echoing through every briefing, every press conference, every conversation. Where was Neil Entwistle? Neil Entwistle was 3,000 miles away, sitting in his parents' house in Worksop, England. He had arrived on January 21st, the day after the murders, on a one-way flight from Boston. He had no luggage, no explanation, no apparent concern for the wife and child he had left behind. He was already constructing his story, already preparing his defense, already believing he had gotten away with it. But he had not gotten away with it, because investigators would not stop asking questions. They would ask why a grieving husband flew to London without luggage. They would ask why his DNA was on the murder weapon. They would ask why he had researched killing methods days before his family died. And when they arrested him, they would ask what was in his pockets and find answers that revealed everything about the man behind the mask. While the Hopkinton police secured the crime scene and began their investigation, 3,000 miles away in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, Neil Entwistle sat in his parents' house. He had arrived on January 21st, the day after the murders, on a one-way flight from Boston. He had no luggage, no explanation, no apparent concern for the wife and child he had left behind. Within days, the media would descend on this quiet cul-de-sac, transforming it into a circus of satellite vans and camera crews. Neighbors would watch in disbelief as the son of a retired coal miner became the focus of an international manhunt. To understand how Neil Entwistle ended up here, a suspect in the murder of his own family, we have to understand the man behind the mask. And the mask, as investigators would soon discover, concealed a very different person than the world had seen. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, the son of Clifford, a coal miner, and Yvonne, a school canteen cook. He grew up in working-class Worksop, attended Valley Comprehensive, and in 1999 went to the University of York to study electronic engineering with business management. He was bright, ambitious, the first in his family to attend university. It was at York that Neil met Rachel Souza, an American student studying abroad for a year. Rachel was everything Neil was not: warm, outgoing, beloved by all who knew her. She coxed for the men's rowing team, and Neil rowed. They met on the river, and something clicked. After graduation, Rachel stayed in England, teaching English and drama at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch. Neil worked for IBM and Kinetic, a defense technology company. They married in August 2003, first in Plymouth, Massachusetts, then in a second ceremony in England. To everyone who knew them, they were the perfect couple. Neil even designed a family website, posting photographs of their Mediterranean cruise, their wedding, their happy moments. In June 2003, he posted a message on Friends Reunited that now seems chillingly prophetic. Make bombs and other stuff for a living. Would tell you more, but I'd have to kill you. A joke, surely. But in light of what would come, the words take on a darker hue. On April 9, 2005, Lillian Rose Entwistle was born. The arrival of their daughter prompted Neil and Rachel to reconsider their future. They decided to move to America, to be closer to Rachel's family, to give Lillian the chance to grow up surrounded by grandparents, aunts, uncles. In September 2005, the Entwistles emigrated to Massachusetts. They stayed first with Rachel's mother and stepfather in Carr. Then, on January 12, 2006, moved into their own home at 6 Cubs Path in Hopkinton. It was a fresh start, a new life. But the American dream was a lie. Neil Entwistle had no job. He had been unemployed since September 2005, 5 months, with no income. He had more than $30,000 in credit card debt. He was under investigation by eBay for numerous fraudulent transactions. His claims of a $10,000 monthly offshore account were complete fabrications, and there was more, much more. When investigators would later search Neil's computer, they would find a digital footprint that revealed a very different man than the devoted husband and father he pretended to be. Neil Entwistle was looking for sex. He visited adult dating websites, searched for escorts in nearby towns, created a profile on Adult Friend Finder that read, "I'm looking to meet American women of all ages. I need to confirm what friends have told me, that you are much better in bed than the women over the ocean. As from there, we both want the same thing, so there is little point dragging it out here. And in the days before the murders, he searched for something else entirely. How to kill. January 16 and 17, 2006. Just days before Rachel and Lillian died, Neil Entwistle researched the best way to kill someone, how to stab someone in the neck, quick suicide methods. While Rachel unpacked boxes and cared for their daughter, while she planned lunch with her mother and dinner with her friends, while she imagined a future in their new home, Neil was sitting at his laptop researching murder. The mask was already cracking. The man behind it was preparing to kill. January 20th, 2006. A Friday. The day that would end with 2 people dead and 1 man on the run. Sometime that morning, Neil Entwistle drove 50 miles to the home of his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo. Joe was at work. The house was empty. Neil had keys that would later be found in his car at Logan Airport. Joe Matarazzo was a member of the Old Colony Sportsman's Club. He kept a .22 caliber Colt revolver at home, secured with a trigger lock, keys on the kitchen counter, spares in the bedroom nightstand. Months earlier, he had taken Neil to the shooting range and taught him to use it. Now, Neil took the gun, he took the spare trigger lock keys, and he drove back to Hopkinton. What happened next is known only to Neil Entwistle. Rachel was in the master bedroom. Perhaps she was holding Lillian. Perhaps Lillian was beside her on the bed. The gun was raised. Rachel was shot once in the forehead, at close range. The bullet was so small it would go undetected until autopsy. Lillian was shot in the abdomen. The bullet passed through her tiny body and lodged in her mother's left breast. Lillian was in Rachel's arms, or cradled against her, when the shot was fired. There was no struggle. No signs of forced entry. Neil covered them with bedding, a quilt pulled over them, as if sleeping. The dog continued to bark. The television played, and Neil Entwistle left. He drove back to Carver. He returned the revolver to the Matarazzo home, placing it back where he found it. The DNA was already on the gun, his on the handle, Rachel's on the muzzle, but no one would know that for days. From Carver, Neil drove to Logan International Airport in Boston. He arrived at approximately 8:14 p.m. He entered the parking garage, left, returned. He withdrew $800 in 2 transactions from various cards. 3 more attempted withdrawals, totaling $420, were denied. At approximately 5 a.m. on January 21st, Neil Entwistle purchased a one-way ticket to London on British Airways. Cost $787. He paid in cash. He had no luggage. At 8:15 a.m., British Airways Flight 212 departed Logan International Airport, bound for London Heathrow. Neil Entwistle was on it. Behind him in a rented townhouse in Hopkinton, his wife and daughter lay dead beneath a quilt. The flight took approximately 7 hours. Neil arrived at Heathrow later that evening. He did not go directly to his parents' house in Worksop. Instead, he drove 800 miles around England, according to police. At 11 p.m. that night, he tried to withdraw money from a cash machine in Manchester. 36 hours after arriving back in England, Neil Entwistle finally turned up at his parents' house. He walked in as if nothing had happened, as if his wife and daughter were not lying dead 3,000 miles away, as if the world were not about to collapse around him. Back in Hopkinton, the investigation was just beginning. The bodies had been found, the house was a crime scene, and the question on everyone's lips was the same. Where is Neil Entwistle? January 23, 2006. 3 days after the murders, 2 days after Neil fled to England, Massachusetts State Trooper Robert Manning placed a call to the Entwistle family home in Worksop. Neil answered. The conversation lasted 2 hours and was recorded. It would become one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in the case, and the only time the jury would hear Neil Entwistle's voice, as he never testified in his own defense. Neil, can you tell me what happened on Friday?
I left around 9 a.m. to run errands. Rachel and Lillian were alive, in bed. When I returned around 11 a.m., I found them dead.
Neil's voice is calm, measured. He speaks in complete sentences. as if describing something that happened to someone else.
I don't know who killed them. I covered their bodies with a blanket and left.
Why didn't you call police?
I was distraught. I wanted to kill myself. I went to the kitchen for a knife, but I feared the pain. I drove to the Matarazzos to get a gun, but the house was locked. I couldn't end my life, so I decided to fly to England to see my parents.
The story is elaborate, detailed, but something is missing. Emotion, grief, the ragged edge of a man who has just lost everything. Instead, Neil sounds almost rehearsed.
I haven't even cried yet. Not properly.
I haven't even cried yet. Not properly. Even Neil recognizes that something is missing. He knows that he should be crying. He knows that grief requires tears, but the tears won't come.
Neil, I need to tell you that Rachel and Lillian's deaths are being treated as foul play.
Okay.
Okay, one word. Not shock, not grief, not what do you mean foul play? Just okay. As if he had been expecting it. That single word would haunt investigators. It would haunt the jury. It would become for many the most damning piece of evidence in the case. Because no innocent man, hearing that his wife and child had been murdered, would respond with, okay. In the days following the murders, before Neil became a suspect, he had conversations with Joe Matarazzo that would prove equally damning. In discussing funeral arrangements, Neil made a strange request.
He asked that Rachel and Lillian be buried together. He said, because that's the way I left them.
Because that's the way I left them. Not because they were mother and daughter, not because they belonged together in death as in life. Because that's the way I left them. As if they were objects he had arranged.
Another time, he said to me, I don't know how it got this way. I was only gone for a couple of hours. Someone shot them.
I was only gone for a couple of hours. How did Neil know when the murders occurred? The police hadn't released a timeline. Only the killer would know. The story unraveled piece by piece. Neil claimed he couldn't get into the Matarazzo's house to get the gun, but his car contained their house keys in the center console. A spare set kept in the doghouse in their backyard was also missing. Neil claimed he only used Joe's gun once, months earlier. But forensic testing would later reveal his DNA on the handle, and Rachel's DNA on the muzzle, consistent with contact at extremely close range. Neil claimed he was distraught, suicidal, but he had driven 50 miles to an airport, bought a one-way ticket, and flown to London without luggage. Suicidal people don't typically plan transatlantic flights. The murder weapon was a .22 caliber Colt revolver owned by Joe Matarazzo. When investigators recovered it from the Matarazzo home, they submitted it for forensic testing. The results would prove decisive. Forensic scientists found Neil Entwistle's DNA on the handle of the gun. They found Rachel Entwistle's DNA on the muzzle, proof that the gun had been held close to her when it was fired. Neil's defense team would later challenge the DNA evidence, arguing that the samples were unreliable, that they had been taken from a water bottle in Neil's car rather than directly from him. But the evidence held. Even more damning was the evidence recovered from Neil's computer. Investigators found a detailed record of his online activities in the days before the murders, a digital footprint that revealed the man behind the mask. On January 16th and 17th, 2006, just days before Rachel and Lillian died, Neil Entwistle searched for the best way to kill someone. He researched how to stab someone in the neck. He looked up quick suicide methods. He even searched for how to hire a contract killer. Interspersed with these murder-related searches were visits to adult websites, escort services, and dating sites where Neil sought discreet sexual encounters. He was living two lives, and both were about to collide. The investigation also revealed Neil's dire financial situation. He was more than $30,000 in debt. He was under investigation by eBay for fraudulent transactions. He had been unemployed for 5 months. The perfect life he had presented to the world was a complete fabrication. And then there was the flight. Neil's hasty departure, his one-way ticket his lack of luggage. All of it pointed to a man who was running, not grieving. On February 9, 2006, Scotland Yard's Extradition Unit arrested Neil Entwistle at Royal Oak Tube Station in London. He was on his way somewhere, perhaps to meet someone, perhaps simply moving through the city. When police searched him, they found 3 items that would prove extraordinarily revealing. First, a 1-page eulogy to Rachel, a tribute to the wife he had lost, written in his own hand. It was, on its face, a grieving husband's farewell, but investigators noted that it was carefully composed, almost literary, the work of a man crafting a narrative, not expressing genuine feeling. Second, a draft of a letter indicating his willingness to sell his story to the highest bidder. Even as he played the role of grieving widower, Neil Entwistle was calculating how to profit from the tragedy. Third, a page torn from the Daily Sport, a British tabloid, a page advertising the services of prostitutes and escort agencies. The man whose wife and daughter lay dead, the man who claimed to be devastated by their loss, was carrying contact information for sex workers in his pocket. Middlesex County District Attorney Martha Copley, who had successfully prosecuted British au pair Louise Woodward a decade earlier, addressed the press after Entwistle's arrest.
On Thursday night, Rachel was alive and had spoken with family members. At some time on Friday morning, Neil Entwistle, with a firearm we believe he had secured at some time before that from father-in-law Joseph Matarazzo, shot Rachel Entwistle in the head and then proceeded to shoot baby Lillian, who was lying on the bed next to her mother. We believe possibly this was intended to be a murder-suicide, but we cannot confirm that. Obviously, the murder was effected, but the suicide was not.
The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, computer searches, financial records, the flight, the items in his pocket. Piece by piece, investigators had assembled a case that would leave little doubt about what happened at 6 Cubs Path on January 20th, 2006. On February 15th, 2006, Neil Entwistle was extradited to the United States. Massachusetts was one of a minority of states without the death penalty, smoothing the path for his return. After initially resisting extradition, he had waived his right to fight it. The following day, February 16th, Neil Entwistle appeared in Framingham District Court. He pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was ordered held without bail at Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge. Rachel's family sat in the gallery, 3 meters from the man accused of killing their daughter and granddaughter. They watched as he stood calmly, expressionlessly, and entered his plea. They would watch the same expression for 2 more years, through delays and motions and pre-trial hearings. The legal machinery ground slowly. Pre-trial motions, evidence disputes, jury selection concerns. Neil's defense team, led by Elliot Weinstein, fought to suppress DNA evidence and the fruits of the warrantless searches at 6 Cubs Path. In December 2006, nearly a year after the murders, officers at Middlesex County Jail found letters Neil had written to his parents and legal team. The letters suggested depression, possible suicidal ideation. He was transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital for mental evaluation. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordes evaluated him and raised a possibility: Asperger's syndrome. Dr. David Holmes later concurred, noting Entwistle's narcissistic aloofness and inability to understand the emotional side of life. But neither expert suggested that this excused the murders.
The lack of empathy in such a disorder would enable the degree of cold, dispassionate callousness in the killing, but would not excuse it. There is no cure for the disorder, and it would not change the fact that Entwistle deliberately killed his wife and child in clear consciousness.
On June 2, 2008, more than 2 years after the murders, jury selection finally began at Middlesex Superior Court in Woburn, Massachusetts. Nearly 200 potential jurors were interviewed. Some admitted they had already formed opinions about Neil's guilt. Others claimed they could be fair. Ultimately, 8 men and 8 women were seated, 12 primary jurors and 4 alternates. They would hear testimony from more than 40 witnesses over 12 days. They would see crime scene photos, hear forensic evidence, listen to the recorded phone call. And they would watch Neil Entwistle, who sat motionless throughout, his face revealing nothing. On June 6, 2008, the trial of Commonwealth versus Neil Entwistle began. Prosecutor Michael Fabry rose to deliver the opening statement.
By outward appearances, Neil and Rachel were a loving couple. But you will also learn there was another side of Neil Entwistle. Financial desperation, online searches for killing methods, escort websites, DNA on the gun, the flight to London.
The trial would last 3 weeks. The defense would call no witnesses. Neil would not testify. And on June 25, 2008, the jury would deliver its verdict. June 25, 2008. Courtroom 430, Middlesex Superior Court. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Neil Entwistle stood before Judge Diane Kottmeyer, his hands folded, his expression unchanged from the day the trial began.
Guilty of first-degree murder on both counts.
Neil showed no emotion. He shook his head subtly. Not denial, not outrage, just a small movement. No tears, no collapse, no yelling. Rachel's family sat in the gallery, 3 meters away, and watched the man who had killed their daughter and granddaughter receive the verdict. They had waited 2.5 years for this moment. They had sat through every day of the trial. They had heard the graphic testimony, seen the crime scene photos, and listened to the recorded phone call. And now, finally, justice. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 2 life sentences to run concurrently. 10 years of probation on the firearms and ammunition charges. 1 additional condition: you may never profit from the sale of your story. The sentence was mandatory for first-degree murder in Massachusetts. Neil Entwistle would die in prison. Neil listened, expressionless.
There was little true feeling for his family when alive or during their killing. The lack of empathy in such a disorder would enable the degree of cold, dispassionate callousness in the killing, but would not excuse it.
As Neil Entwistle was led away to begin his life sentence, the investigation that had caught him finally came to a close. It had taken 2.5 years, involved law enforcement on 2 continents, and uncovered a web of deception that no one had suspected. But in the end, the evidence had spoken. Rachel and Lillian Entwistle were buried together in Evergreen Cemetery, Kingston, Massachusetts. The headstone bears Rachel's maiden name, Souza. Lillian's birth and death certificates list no father. The house at 6 Cubs Path still stands. The current residents report no unusual activity. But for those who know the story, it will always be the place where a young mother and her baby were shot to death and covered with a quilt, while the man who killed them flew across the ocean without luggage, without tears, without apparent recognition that anything of significance had occurred. Neil Entwistle is incarcerated at Old Colony Correctional Center in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. He has exhausted all appeals and will die in prison. He still wears the mask. He still doesn't cry. He still doesn't explain. But perhaps the most revealing evidence was not the DNA or the computer searches or the flight. It was the 3 items found in Neil Entwistle's pocket when he was arrested. A eulogy to the wife he had killed, a plan to profit from her death, and an advertisement for prostitutes. In those 3 items, the man behind the mask was finally visible. The investigation into the murders of Rachel and Lillian Entwistle was a masterpiece of forensic detection. It began with a missed opportunity, a police officer who walked past a bedroom without seeing the bodies beneath the quilt. But it ended with justice, because investigators refused to stop asking questions. They asked why a grieving husband would fly to London without luggage. They asked why his DNA was on the murder weapon. They asked why he had researched killing methods days before his family died. And when they arrested him, they asked what was in his pockets and found a eulogy, a plan to profit, and an advertisement for prostitutes. In those 3 items, the mask finally slipped. Neil Entwistle never confessed. He never explained. He sat through his trial without emotion, heard the verdict without reaction, and will die in prison without ever telling the world what happened at 6 Cubs Path on January 20th, 2006. But the evidence speaks for him: the DNA, the computer searches, the flight, the items in his pocket. They tell the story of a man who wore a mask so convincingly that no one suspected what lay beneath, until it was too late. If you want to understand how this investigation unfolded, the missed search, the phone call, the forensic breakthroughs, the dramatic arrest, watch the full documentary on my channel. Links are in the description and on the end screen. Here's what you can do right now. Number 1. Watch the complete deep dive on the Neil Entwistle case. It's 90 minutes of detailed investigation, with every piece of evidence, every courtroom moment, every twist and turn. Links are below. Number 2. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think was the most damning piece of evidence in this case. Was it the DNA, the computer searches, the phone call response? Okay. The items in his pocket? I read every comment, and your thoughts shape the content I create. Number 3. Hit that like button and subscribe. These documentaries take months to research and produce. Your support keeps this content coming. Number 4. Share this video. These stories need to be told because they remind us that evil can wear a familiar face, that danger can hide in plain sight, that the quiet home can be the stage for the darkest tragedies. Number 5. If you or someone you know is in an abusive situation, reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. Rachel Entwistle trusted her husband. Lillian Entwistle trusted her father, as infants do, completely without question. They are buried together in Evergreen Cemetery, beneath a headstone that bears Rachel's maiden name. Lillian's birth and death certificates list no father. These victims are not just names in a true crime story. They were people. They had lives, loves, dreams. They were taken by someone they trusted. Honor them by learning their stories. Honor them by staying aware, staying vigilant, and never taking trust for granted. Rachel Entwistle, Lillian Entwistle. Gone, but not forgotten. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.